Hello, catering and banquets class. Welcome to your online lecture on contract basics. In addition to this online lecture, please go ahead and read Chapter 10, having to do with contracts and negotiations, or in your online textbook that is available through the MC Library, and you can access it on the main menu panel in Blackboard. So go ahead and read that in addition to today's lecture. Okay. So the definition of a contract and why this is so important. So remember that anytime that we as caterers accept to do a job for any client that we have, we need to understand that that is a contract. So we are willing to perform either a service or provide goods for something in return. And we'll talk about what those terms are. But essentially, the definition of a contract is an agreement or a promise between two or more parties that the courts will enforce. It's really important to understand this. All of the outlines or everything that the expectations, whatever the client needs or is expecting, has to be outlined in a contract so that both parties can be held responsible if the outcome is not what was defined in the contract. And we'll kind of give a couple of examples of what I mean by that. Okay, so there are actually three parts to a contract, and these are all this legal jargon, and this is something that the courts or lawyers will actually ask. It's going to be the first thing if you go and you say, hey, somebody failed to pay me for services that I provided or did not pay the full amount, whatever it is. The lawyer is going to ask for three things and proof of three things, essentially. The first thing is an offer. So an offer is an actual proposal for one party to do something, provide something. Then if it's accepted by the other party or parties, that will be a legal contract. There has to be some sort of an offer in order for somebody to accept it. And I know this kind of seems interesting, but, or it might even seem like matter of fact, yes, of course, if somebody says, oh, do you want to cater? Will you cater my party? This and the other thing. But it has to do with the fact of what does the offer state? So even if I say, yes, I will cater your birthday party, part of that offer has to be, a date and a time and a location and all of those things. And if that is not an offer and if that was not accepted, then that person cannot expect you to do X, Y, and Z as they thought was going to be performed. Okay, so somebody might say, "Hey, I want you to cater my party," and you say, "Okay, well, I'll cater your party," and you talk about a menu, and that's what's that's what's expected, and then you bring the food to this party at the time stated, and the person at the party says, "Well, where are the tables and where are the people that are going to serve the food?" And you say, well, that wasn't part of the agreement. You said, will you cater my party? We talked about the menu, but as far as everything else, that was not part of the contract. And the person say, well, isn't that just expected, for a caterer to provide X, Y, Z? And you can come back and say, well, that was never discussed. Those were never the terms of the offer. So it's very important. Consideration is the second part. That is where somebody or the terms of the contract are actually negotiated. So the payment or any type of value, anything that's exchanged for the contract, that's where there is something almost like in exchange, this for exchange of that. Now, does that always have to be money? Not necessarily. It does not always have to be money. It could be services or exchange of goods or whatever that may be. So once again, but there has to be something exchanged. There has to be, I performed this, in return for this, right? And the other party says, I will accept this and then give you this in exchange for it. So same thing, that has to be outlined in the contract. And then finally, an acceptance. An acceptance is very important. That's an unconditional agreement to the premises and the conditions of an offer. And the reason that's important is that there has to be somebody that accepts an offer. It can't just be out in the open. We say that this is what we're requesting and then nobody actually accepts the offer. So let's talk about each of these three things and why they're so important. And what are the legal ramifications that we have? This is really important for caterers to understand, not only caterers, but also those, the clients of caterers. This is all legal. So this is not something where somebody can say, well, I think that this should be a part of the contract, whatever it is. there have to be this is a legal situation in the United States. Now, this might not be everywhere else, but in the US, this is how the legal system would interpret a contract and then potentially make a decision on who was at fault or who was in the right. So. All right, so the offer, there are different things the offer can actually have, but it must include, or it should include, instructions of how, when, or to whom the offer is made, the frames or deadlines to acceptance. So maybe, this contract or this offer is valid for 60 days. It must be returned by so-and-so date, whatever it may be. And then the price of the term. So this, the contract, this offer, we will provide these services or this food or whatever it may be for this specific price. Also, typically the part of the offer might be something where a deposit is required or whatever. Those are all things that should be included in the offer. The more detailed the offer, the better, because that will give the client a better understanding of everything that is expected. Kind of sense. The offer should be written by the party providing the services, and it should only be written after a consultation with the client and a true understanding of what the client actually needs. All right, the consideration. The consideration for the contract, there has to be, this is where I say that there has to be some sort of exchange, and it has to flow both ways, which means that I give something and then you give something in return, and we agree on who gives what, right? So it does not always have to be money. Like if we say that we are going to provide a steak for $25, a portion, then obviously the consideration is there will be a $25 exchange of money. So $25 will be given to the caterer for every single steak that the caterer provides. So that's very easy. But there's also times where there could be an offer made, such as the second scenario where somebody says that we will host a holiday party for a decorating company in exchange for that decorating company to actually come and decorate the restaurant. And I can't say free because the consideration here is just the exchange of goods and services, right? So in this scenario, I would make sure that this is quite detailed, is what the, if we're hosting a party for a catering, for a decorating company, that the decorations in the restaurant as a result, this still needs a lot, of detail, because what if they just come and give you a wreath to hang on the door, right? That would not balance out throwing them a party. So that's something that we need to understand. So obviously the consideration, we understand that there is something that you can do or you won't do, but that is the consideration. And the acceptance is really important as well, because the acceptance has to be a clear acceptance of the offer given. If there is something, if there's a change made, right? If the person that's accepting the offer crosses out the deadline or says, no, we will only give you a 20% deposit, not a 50, then that is considered a counter offer. And then the catering company has to rewrite the offer and then send it back for another acceptance. So that's also very important. So you do not have to come to those terms or agree to those terms if there's some sort of change. So that now becomes a counter offer, which now has to be rewritten into the original offer and then has to be accepted again with the changes made. Okay, so that's very important to know. All right, the types of acceptance that are acceptable. Okay, so I am here to tell you that writing is very, very important, and to have something in writing is probably the best form. Now, some people are like, oh, well, nonverbal agreements, they're valid and whatever it may be. If you have a nonverbal agreement and the value of the either services or whatever it is in excess of $500, then it's null and void. So anything of value of over $500 cannot be a verbal agreement. So, oh, you said a verbal agreement that you were going to sell me your car for $50,000. That doesn't matter. They could say whatever they want. It has to be a $500 value or lower. Then the verbal acceptance can be fought out. But whatever it may be. If there is a deposit placed, or if you say, or somebody posts a deposit, that is an acceptance of whatever the terms are. So that's obviously, if you put down a deposit, if you put down your credit card, you are accepting the terms of the conditions. This is why you always have to write, especially when it comes to hotels or anything like that, and you have to make sure that those are valid terms. And then obviously any type of partial or full payment, writing is your best policy. Make sure that whatever writing that you have, that actually that is kind of the valid thing. The best way to have it is something in writing. Okay, so looking at many agreements in the industry and kind of where we're looking at, right? So obviously, is writing the best form of acceptance, like we said it already is? Are they enforceable? Yes. If there's any type of acceptance, it is acceptable. I will actually post this very funny little video from Charlie Brown about acceptance and contracts. There's also another kind of funny one for you guys to just be entertained by, the fact that if it states something in the contract, it has to be enforced. So that's kind of where it is. What types of writings are acceptable for an acceptance? Any type of formal signature on an agreement, the PDF, Adobe PDF, if it's time snapped, that's the best thing, where you have somebody's signature and it actually will actually stamp it saying it was signed on this date, at this time. That's what it is. Email acceptance is also very good because that's obviously tracking when it was sent and also when it was sent back and signed. So anything like that, any affirmations online in those documents, that's always really good. Electronic signatures are really good. I don't know if you have homework, if you have penmanship like I do, which is absolutely terrible. Those are things that could be contested in court, but something like an electronic signature is actually quite good when it comes to enforcing contracts. Okay. So, if you have an offer and if you had a consideration and acceptance, is that it? Is that something? Is that null and void contract is valid? Not so fast. There are a couple of other things that you have to make sure that are part of the contract. One of the first thing is you have to actually understand that the person entering into the contract or accepting or whatever it is at a capacity where they have either the right, the power, or mental capacity to go into a contract. So this means that obviously a person that is under the age of 18 cannot go into contract with anybody. So this is something where the party, they would have to have somebody of age that would actually accept for them. Also, they need to be of the right mind. So it's a pertinent person is what we call that. So somebody who is in the right mental state to go ahead and go into that. And also legally, they have the power to sign and accept a contract on behalf of a company or whatever it is. So those are all things that you actually have to check in order for those, for that contract to be valid. And there's also things that we understand that are just requirements, and I mentioned a couple of these. The fact that obviously if there's any exchange of goods or services over the price tag of $500, it has to be in writing. The seller has obligation to provide goods that are not defective. So that's another thing. If we go into a contract, the seller or the person providing the goods, they are acknowledging that they will provide a good that is not bad, that is not tampered with, that is not up to the standards of whatever the contract was. So all of those things are really important. Otherwise, the contract is null and void. So those are things to keep in mind. And then obviously, the buyer also is also, has their own part in this. And the fact that they also need to inspect the goods that were potentially purchased to make sure that they meet the terms of the contract, right? And then also they have to notify the seller or whoever is doing that to actually say, hey, these are not up to the standard. And they actually have to, a lot of times, according to contracts, give the seller an opportunity to make up or remedy the situation. So all these things are just something to keep in mind whenever somebody is writing the actual contract. And then if any of these things happen, if the seller is selling bad goods or anything like that, there is such a thing as breach of contract. You guys probably have seen this in movies or anywhere else. And there are several reasons that might be. There might be some voluntary, involuntary, all that stuff as far as contracts. But for whatever reason, if one party cannot meet the material terms of the actual contracts, we do call that a breach. And whether that is on purpose or not on purpose, or whether the contract was just not clear, those are all reasons that we could say, well, there's been a breach of contract and now it's null and void. Once again, there has to be proof of that. Make sure that you have proof of that if there is such a thing, such as a caterer saying that they're going to make everything from scratch and then you find out they actually went to Wegmans, right? So you could say that's a breach of contract. I'm not going to pay the prices that we say, and obviously things like that. There is something called force majeure, which is when something happens outside of parties' control. We use this a lot when it came to COVID, and that's basically saying that we cannot cannot enforce the contract because something happened out of our reach, such as COVID. So there you are. Finally, just make sure that these are kind of the final things when it comes to a contract. Keep that in mind.